on, guys? So today we're going to be solving question number 16 and 17. This is from the SAT number 17, the reading section. And 16 says, the passage implies that when conducting his laboratory work, Fernbach would have been most surprised by which finding? And we know that we have answer choices down here, so this is a paired question. So we know that the best way to solve these types of paired questions is to start with the question from 16, like we did, and then move down through the answer choices for 17, going through A, B, C, and D. And we're going to read through each one of these texts, 26 through 30, et cetera, et cetera. And basically, we're going to be looking for any sort of text that could answer this question here. So again, this question is basically asking, what would Fernbach have been most surprised by? So the way to do that is to come down to these answer choices and look for a couple of things. So one is that we could try to look for something that the passage explicitly says that he would be surprised by. The other thing that we could look for is maybe look for something that tells us about an expectation that he might have. And from there, we can basically just take the reverse of that expectation and then sort of understand what he might be surprised at. So we might not know in advance really what text we can find, but we should be able to still identify one or two different texts that will clearly answer this. So let's see if we can do that. Let's start with 26 through 30. So that's going to be right here, I believe. This is what, 29, 28, 27, 26, yeah. So this starts by saying they started by recruiting a group of volunteers in their 30s, Democrats, Republicans, and Independents, and asking them to state their positions on a variety of issues, from a national flat tax to a cap and trade system for carbon emissions. So this right here, immediately I can almost eliminate this one. And the reason why is this whole paragraph here, and especially this sentence right here, is sort of just introducing the methodology of the experiment that Fernbach conducted. So this is basically just telling us who the group was, some specifics about them, etc., and what they were asked. What it doesn't do is tell us anything about Fernbach's beliefs, either something that would surprise him or something that he expected. So for that reason, I don't think it's a very strong answer choice. Then we go through 34 through 38, which is right here. That says, then the volunteers were instructed to write elaborate explanations of two issues. If the issue was cap and trade, for example, they would just explain precisely what cap and trade means, how it is implemented, whom it benefits, and whom it could hurt, the sources of carbon emissions, and so forth. So again, what this is still sort of in the category of simple methodology. This is basically just the passage explaining what Fernbach did when he conducted his experiment, what the volunteers were asked to do, how they were asked to write elaborate explanations, etc. But what it doesn't do, again, is explain anything about Fernbach, anything about his beliefs, his expectations, etc. So for that reason, I think we can get rid of B as well. Then we have C, which is lines 39 through 42. That's right here. This says they were not asked for value judgments about the policy or about the environment or business, but only for a highly detailed description of the mechanics of the policy in action. So again, we still have what we're going to call methodology, right? This is still explaining how the experiment was set up, how the experiment was designed, and sort of how they conducted it, right? They weren't asked for value judgments, etc. Again, what it doesn't do is on its surface, it doesn't tell us anything about what Fernbach expected, anything that he might find surprising. So I would eliminate C as well. That's going to leave us with D. Let's see if that makes sense. So D starts here. It says Fernbach's idea was that such an exercise would force many to realize just how little they really know about cap and trade, and confronted with their own ignorance, they would dampen their own enthusiasm. So this is good because what this is doing is giving us a clear explanation of something that Fernbach believed, right? This is one of his ideas, something that he thinks would be true. And basically what he says is he thinks that doing this exercise would make people realize that they really don't understand these policies that they're so invested in, like cap and trade. And basically that when they realize their own ignorance, it's going to dampen their enthusiasm. So this tells us a clear expectation or belief that Fernbach has. So all we have to do is sort of say he would be most surprised by the opposite of this belief. So because he believes that this exercise is going to make people feel or see how ignorant they are, he might be surprised if in fact it turns out that they weren't that ignorant after all, or they didn't appreciate their own ignorance, or they didn't realize their own ignorance, etc. So let's see if we have an answer choice that could sort of match as the reverse of that. So A says no link was found between the complexity of an issue and the strength of the volunteer's position. So this says that Fernbach would basically be surprised if there wasn't some sort of connection between how complex an issue was and basically how strong a volunteer's position was. But this doesn't really make too much sense here because there's really no indication that Fernbach expects to find a link between how complex or how difficult an issue is and basically how much a volunteer believes it. This is basically when we're talking about a very complex issue, and Fernbach expects that the more complex an issue is, the more that the volunteer is going to believe in it. But he doesn't have that expectation, so A wouldn't really be right. B says that after volunteers were asked to analyze a complicated political issue, their understanding of it did not increase. So this is basically saying Fernbach would be surprised if after he asked the volunteers to sort of analyze and explain their complicated issue, that they didn't understand it better. But for him to be surprised at that, he would basically have to expect that the act of analyzing and writing things about a political issue was going to make their understanding increase. But we saw in none of the answer choices that we looked at, and really not nowhere in the passage at all, do we see that he has this expectation. So I would get rid of B. Then we have C, which says when volunteers were asked to list their reasons for endorsing a particular policy, their views were generally unaffected by the exercise. So for this to be true, for Fernbach to be surprised at this, he would have to have the expectation that when he asked people just to list their reasons, right, not to give an explanation. Remember that within the passage, there's two experiments. The first one is about giving a detailed explanation of the policy, and the second one is just listing reasons. So for this to be true, it would have to be the case that he expected that when you list your reasons, that your view is affected, so that he would be surprised if it was unaffected. However, there's two reasons why this is wrong. So we do find out later that when you when volunteers or participants did list their reasons, their views did change, right? And so this might be something that Fernbach expected, or he would be surprised if they didn't change, right? Excuse me, no, I'm incorrect here. So this is when they did list their reasons for the endorsing of policy, their views actually didn't change. That's what happened. So, but the problem with C is that there's really no indication that Fernbach had an expectation about this second experiment. It almost acts as if he didn't really know. He just wanted to try it and see what would happen. And the most important part is that none of the texts that we just looked at really talk about Fernbach's belief or expectation that listing reasons were going to affect people's view. So we get rid of C. D says that when volunteers were asked questions about complex issues, those with the most extreme views were found to have the best overall understanding of them. So for this one to be true, it would have to be that basically Fernbach has this expectation that when you ask volunteers these complex issues, that they don't really have a complete understanding of them, right? So that he would be surprised if, in fact, when they were asked about these complex issues, those who had the most extreme views actually understood them pretty well. And I think that does match what we have down here, which basically says that his idea was that people would realize just how little they really know and be confronted with their own ignorance. So it seems like he definitely would be surprised if, in fact, they had the best overall understanding of them, right? Those with extreme views. So for that reason, we can choose answer choice D for question 16 and answer choice D for question 17.